Well, good morning, Encounter Church. It is good to be with you again this morning as we begin a new teaching series. And finally, our graphics have caught up with the pastor's attire. And so hopefully this is all going to mesh with you. We had some great conversations, actually, when we put series together and we talked with our graphics people and we try to come up with what would be the best image to portray what it is that we are looking to talk about. And for many of us, this whole aspect of palm trees and blue skies brings an element of rest. And so I think they chose wisely as we look ahead to this teaching series that we're entitling Sabbath. So, but before we get into that, I want to just remind you, in a few weeks, we're having a next Discovering Encounter class. It's one of the things that we do here at Encounter to help you understand who we are, kind of what makes us tick, a little bit of a behind-the-scenes look at what we truly believe, our mission and vision, the values that we hope we are living out through our behavior, what our past has looked like a little bit, but how that informs and then helps us to look forward to where God is leading us. We've had a great vision that's brought us into this room the past 9 years we've spent getting there, kind of what's next. So if you've got any of those kinds of questions about Encounter Church, it's a great afternoon to be able to get some answers to those questions. It's from 2 to 5 o'clock on a Sunday afternoon. We have childcare. We have some breaks in the middle of that, an opportunity for you to ask questions. And so if any of that is of interest to you, I would encourage you to plan now. It's the middle of October. I just want you to plan because of our busy schedules, which we're going to be talking about during this series. It's a good thing for us to plan ahead. So as I mentioned, today we begin a new teaching series, and we just simply decided to call it Sabbath without adding a lot of other things to it. Sabbath. What does that conjure up in your mind? Well, I'm going to ask you right at the start to not have any preconceptions about what the Sabbath is all about. I know that word, as you were thinking about it right now, can have a lot of different meanings. I think some of them are good. I think some of them maybe not so good. I also know that some of them are very unhealthy and very actually unbiblical. So I'm going to invite you to listen this morning and over the next 6 weeks with an open mind. Sincerely ask God to speak to you. What is on His heart for you? Because when we talk about Sabbath, there's an element of it that's very individual. It's about who you are, how God has wired you, and then what Sabbath is going to mean for you. So ask God to do that over this series, to speak His heart into yours. Because I know that this teaching over the next 6 weeks, if you allow it, is going to be a transformational moment, a defining moment, I believe, in your journey with Jesus. Whether you're there yet, whether you're still trying to figure out who Jesus is, I think this series is going to bring some answers. I think it's that important. I've been so appreciative of our preaching team as we've gotten together, some of the teaching pastors and Brock, and trying to figure out what is it that God is saying to us, what is He leading us into as far as what we're teaching, and this one has just come first and foremost. With that said, I need to say right up front that this is a practice, keeping the Sabbath, that I personally struggle with. I want you to understand that there's a difference between our keeping the Sabbath and having our daily time with God. Very different. I know what that one means, my devotional time with God. I know what it means to have a daily time with God, to spend time praying to Him, to read His Word, to meditate, to think about God. That one I'm doing fairly well at. But Sabbath keeping, I'm going to suggest to you is something very different. Now, if I had been the lone person thinking through, as it's been for many years, what we're going to be teaching on, I would have spoken on the Sabbath in what we call a one-off. It would have been one message. On the Sabbath, I would have told you kind of what it is, what you're supposed to do, and we would have gone on to something else. As I've told the preaching team, I would not have chosen to spend 6 weeks, partly because it's something that I struggle with. There's a lot of nuances to Sabbath. We've started a practice since Pastor Amanda has been here, where she has said to all of our staff, and that includes me, that you have permission to have one day a month, one of your work days, and that can be your Sabbath retreat day. You can take that day. Now, not just to have a day off to do whatever you want, but a literal day that you take off and you spend time with God at a more extended time, like a Sabbath. So we've been doing that now for several months. We have this monthly calendar that's given out to the staff. And there's this little block that's given to who's taking their Sabbath retreats when. Interesting. There has yet to be in that box a name other than Pastor Amanda. We have 14 staff that are paid, like full-time, part-time. 14. One name only. And that hasn't been every month either, so let's not lift her up too high. So it's something that not only I struggle with, our staff struggles with. I suspect that for many of us, we struggle with Sabbath. And I'm hoping that over these 6 weeks, we will begin to understand at a much deeper level the need that you and I have to Sabbath. With that said, I want you to listen to this story and see if there's any parts of it that you can identify with. A business executive talking into his cellular phone is walking across a beautiful sun-drenched beach. Ahead of him, a man in simple clothes is dozing in the shade of a fishing boat that's been pulled up onto the beach. As the executive passes, the fisherman wakes up, and the executive, he's now waiting for a call to be returned, decides to make conversation. The weather is great. There are plenty of fish. Why are you lying around instead of going out and catching more? And the fisherman replies, well, because I caught enough this morning. But just imagine, the executive says, if you went out 3 or 4 times a day and brought home 3 or 4 times as many fish, you know what could happen? And puzzled, the fisherman shakes his head. Why, says the executive, now he's becoming enthusiastic, you could buy yourself a motorboat. And then perhaps after 3 years, you could have a cutter or 2. And just think, one day you might be able to build a freezing plant. You might eventually even get your own helicopter for tracing shoals of fish and guiding your fleet of cutters. You could even acquire your own trucks to ship your fish to the capital. And then, asks the fisherman, and then the executive, and he concludes triumphantly, you could be calmly sitting at the beachside, dozing in the sun and looking at the beautiful ocean. To which the fisherman replies, what do you think I'm doing now? Our modern lifestyles are ruthless. They're ruthless. I'm old enough to remember the time when they were saying that, technology is coming and it's going to be so awesome that we're not going to know what to do with all the time we're going to save. We're going to have 20 and 30-hour work weeks. It's going to be incredible. I remember in my Chemistry 101 in college, the professor standing on the stage like this and holding up this calculator. It was pretty big, but he was holding it in one hand, and he was saying, listen to this, someday, all of you kids are going to own your own calculator. That does show a little bit how old I am, I know, but technology was going to save us. It was going to save us. You know, you and I know intuitively that our time is finite. And yet the demands on our time seem infinite. Both our own experience and all the statistics would tell us that we are working harder, we're earning more money than ever before, and yet we're more fatigued than we've ever been. And there seems to be less and less time to enjoy the money that we're making. Now, we've just come through, well, actually, most of us are still in it. Probably one of the most stressful and time-consuming seasons of the year. It's back to school. Whether you have kids or not, or whether you are one of those kids, it's an incredible, stressful time. We're making lists. We can't believe how long our lists are. And for some of us, we don't even bother to make the list because it's something else that we have to add to the list that we're not making. And so why would we even do that? We have to make appointments. We have to exercise. We have to make phone calls. We have to check Facebook. We have to go shopping. We have children to take care of. We have school. We have Twitter. We have church. We have movies. We have books. We have emails to return. Oh, yeah, and then there's Facebook again. And then there's family. And there's friends. All of which are good things. None of those are bad things. But the list never ends. And you're feeling it. I know you are. I feel it. So what are we to do? If your body could talk, what would it be telling you today? This morning we're going to talk about the fourth commandment. And it's God himself who says these words in Exodus chapter 20, verse 8. Remember to observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. It's the fourth commandment. It's actually pretty much in the middle of the 10 commandments that God gave to Moses on Mount Sinai. The first three commandments, 1, 2, and 3, talk about God, who God is, how important God is, that he is the only God, that we need to be in awe of who he is. The last 6 commandments, 5 through 10, are all about community and the people that we live with. And right in the middle of who God is and all of the people that we are to interact with in community is this command to rest. Now, before you think that this is simply another command or another burden imposed on us by God, and I have to admit sometimes that's how I feel. There's another thing that I have to do now, so there's my Sabbath day, so I have to make sure I put that on my list. It's not only God who says that the Sabbath is important. All current research, whether it's secular or religious, points to the fact that when we take a day of rest, 1 in 7, we're healthier, we're stronger, we're more productive at work, we're more engaged in our relationships, we're more engaged with God. We are simply better men and women when we take a break, when we take a Sabbath. You see, God's Sabbath is a gift to us. It's not a burden. It's a blessing that God recognized you and I need. We'll get into this in the weeks ahead, but for those of us who serve on staff, for most of us, Sunday is not our Sabbath. We're working as hard as we work all week on Sunday. So it's not so much even about the day as it's making sure that we're setting aside Sabbath. Again, I may be showing a little bit of my age, but I remember growing up with Sunday rules. What you can, and mostly what you cannot do on a Sunday. I grew up in Western Canada, in Saskatchewan, Saskatoon in particular. My parents would say to me, there's no sports on Sunday because it's the Sabbath. We definitely didn't do any shopping, but of course, at least in Western Canada, nothing was open on Sunday. And in fact, we were so rural and so up north that stores even closed Wednesday afternoon. Like, seriously, Carol Ann and I, we went to seminary in Portland, Oregon, so we were in the States for 3 years. And even back then, most things were open pretty much 7 days a week. All of a sudden, we moved to Saskatoon, and everything is closed Wednesday afternoon. Everything is closed on Sunday. Stores close early on Saturday. There was an aspect, I'm not sure it was for religious reasons, but there was this idea that we took a break. But for me, as an 8 and 9-year-old kid, Sundays were not all that much fun. We had church in the morning, then we had to go home, and my parents said we have to nap. Now, those of you who have kids, you say, wow, that would be awesome. We never seem to get it. And if we decided to play, we had to play quietly. Like seriously, 7, 8-year-old boys, how do you play quietly? There were blue laws, especially in Pennsylvania. Did you know that Sunday home baseball games for the Phillies and the Pirates on Sundays couldn't begin an inning after 6 o'clock? I mean, you had to slow down and end the day early. So in my growing up, a lot of Sunday rules were not positive. I didn't look at that as a real fun thing. Didn't understand it. But as I look back on it, it wasn't all negative. There was this positive side, which we're also going to be talking about in the weeks ahead, that part of the Sabbath is being spent with others. It's a very communal thing, not something that you necessarily do alone. And so I can remember for us and all my aunts and uncles and cousins, very often on Sunday afternoons, after the nap, we'd go visit family. We'd just drive about 20 minutes, half an hour out into the country where most of my aunts and uncles lived on farms, and we would spend time together. Then I could play a little bit more loudly because we were, pushed outside. But we had to come home early because a part of Sabbath was also worshiping God, and we had Sunday nights, and so we had to go to church. It was a little annoying because church went from 7 to 8, and Bonanza started at 8. And sometimes we were allowed to watch Bonanza at 8 o'clock. But it's interesting the stuff we bring to Sabbath. And I'm hoping that we're going to debunk some of the folklore of Sabbath and actually find out what God really means about keeping the Sabbath. So look with me at Genesis chapter 2. We're going to go back a little bit now. Exodus 20 is where the 10 Commandments were given, but all the way back to the creation account. Genesis chapter 2, look at these words. On the seventh day, God had finished his work of creation. So he rested from all his work. And God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, because it was the day when he rested from all his work of creation. Let me give you a little context to these verses, because I think we often misinterpret what is being said, or we simply have some questions, like deep questions, like, does that mean God was tired? I mean, did he need to rest? Was he weary from all of the exertion of turning chaos into creation? I mean, did he really mean what he said when he said to stop and to rest, to feast, to celebrate once every 7 days? I mean, seriously, is this something that we're to do in the 21st century? Well, first of all, God, didn't need to rest, okay, as we define the term. He wasn't tired. And in fact, the word that's translated rest is probably more accurately translated to cease. He ceased from his working 6 days in creation. And on that day of ceasing, he rested. He settled in. There was an element of safety and security in the creation that he had just done. So he said, this is good, and he rested, and he blessed it. He extended his favor on it, on the creation, and on his day of rest. He kept saying, it is good. It's very good. And actually, that's going to become a major part of where we're going over the next several weeks. What it means for us as human beings to rest in him and to rest in his favor. Now, this might be a good place just to interject a couple of comments about work. So we're talking about ceasing from work, but we just had a long weekend, did we not, last week, where we celebrated what? Work. By what? Not working. So it's Labor Day, but we don't do labor. We took the day off. That's kind of cool. That's okay. But, while we're in this series on the Sabbath, we are talking about taking rest from work, but understand clearly that work is good. Work is good. Work was part of God's design for humanity. And it's important for us to be grateful for the work that God has given to us. About 3 years ago, I gave a message on Labor Day weekend where we just talked about work, and we talked about the fact that wherever we are, whatever work God has given to you and to me, he is present there. He is with you there. And if he's present with you there, whatever that job is, temporary, permanent, whatever that is, if he is present there, then there's a purpose behind your work. There's a purpose behind your work. Because even in our work, as it's going to be as you hear about the Sabbath, it's all about God. And so the Apostle Paul put it this way in Colossians 3. He said, work willingly at whatever you do, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Now, that's not always easy. Some of our workplaces are tough places to be, but if God is present there, then he has a purpose, and we are grateful. But I would suggest to you that in our Western world especially, we have made work. We have made the pursuit of success and happiness and busyness and the accumulation of stuff our gods. Maybe not intentionally, maybe not consciously, but the way we live our lives shows that somehow this is all out of whack. And it is to that the Sabbath speaks directly. I mean, you and I know the stats. We read them, we see them, we feel them. 80% of us are stressed about our work. 80%. 63% of all employees, we do want to work less. 61% of Americans check email while on vacation. I can hardly believe this stat, only 14% of us take at least 2 weeks of vacation at the same time. We just can't afford to take that much time off. As an aside, people in America today spend more time in the bathroom than on vacation. Like somehow that just doesn't seem right, does it? It just doesn't seem right. 62% of us typically end our workday with neck pain. 62%. 44 of us report strained eyes. 38% complain of hand pain. 34% have a difficult time sleeping because they're just thinking about the stress of work. 88% of us. This is across the spectrum, not just in church, out church. It's all of us. 88% of us say we have a difficult time juggling work and life. We're working more hours than any time since the 1920s. We're working approximately 8 weeks longer per year than in 1969. The time when I was starting college and hearing that technology was going to save us time. That's in the space of a single generation. From 1969 to now, we're working 8 weeks longer than we were, getting paid about the same if we adjust it for inflation. And the list goes on. So friends, I'm not sure where you are on this spectrum. But what we're going to be talking about over these next several weeks is how to bring balance to that equation, so that you and I can enjoy the work that God has given us to do, but then to equally enjoy our time of stopping from our work, resting from our work, delighting in the blessings and the communal side of who God is, and worshiping Him. Because it's possible. And I would suggest it's necessary. Okay, back to Genesis 2. God was not tired. That's not what keeping the Sabbath meant to God. And at the end of the day, it's not what it's supposed to mean to you and I, that we're tired, that we're so exhausted that we need some time off. Now, it may be a part of it. We've just looked at the stats, so that's true. But I want us now just to step back for a moment, go all the way back to creation, back to Genesis 2, and take this really big picture look and realize that the Sabbath is about God. The Sabbath is about God. It's not about my needs. It's not about my wants. It's not about my family. It's not about my world. It's not about my church. It's about God. This is foundational to our understanding of the Sabbath. So let me dive just a little bit deeper for a moment. Over my years of ministry, I've seen a movement, and I would suggest it's picking up speed today, where it's becoming easy to think of my faith, my Christian faith, almost solely in terms of what God has done for me through Jesus. It's about me. It's almost a me religion. It's subtle, but follow with me. See if this makes any sense. We speak a lot about God loves me. Jesus, He died for me. Jesus saved me. It's almost at some point, God owes me something. Wow, He did all that for me. Now, those things are all true. But if we stop there, our view of our faith is deficient. Because it's not about me. Just like the Sabbath is not about me, it's about God. And so if we're taking that one step further, I need to understand that when I'm looking at the big picture of Sabbath, it's all about who God is. And if it's all about God, follow with me now. If it's all about God, then the Sabbath is not so much a rule, it's not so much a command that we have to follow, rather it's an acknowledgement of who God is. This world that He has put me in is His world. It's His creation. The time that He has given me on planet Earth, He has given to me. His time to me is His gift to me. The time that I have on earth and how I use it is my gift back to God. John Walton, in his commentary on Genesis, puts it this way. He says, if we have to be reminded, commanded, or coerced to observe the Sabbath, it ceases to serve its function. He said, we need to stop looking at our faith, at Christianity, as being defined as a set of rules that we have to keep. Christian freedom doesn't say there are no rules, but rather, this is so important, we shouldn't need rules. Like our Bibles, it's not a book of rules. The Bible is very clear even about itself, that it reveals to us who God is, the God whom we serve, and the God whom we serve gladly. And so in the end, our faith, our following Jesus, being Christ followers, is all about who God is. So we're going to dive into some of those areas in more detail in the weeks ahead. But let me just share with you quickly what the Bible tells us about the Sabbath. It tells us very little, first of all, about what to do on the Sabbath. I find that interesting. Almost nothing about what you're supposed to do on a Sabbath. It tells us a couple of things what not to do. But follow with me. If in fact the Sabbath is all about God, then as Walton just said, wouldn't that detract considerably if God then had to tell us what to do? In other words, if it's about God and our love for Him, then the Sabbath really is us doing whatever reflects that love of God, our respect of God, our awe of God. And we can decide, because it's our personal relationship with Him in that time. The prophet Isaiah said it this way. Look at these words in Isaiah 58. He said, keep the Sabbath day holy. Don't pursue your own interests on that day. Enjoy the Sabbath. Speak of it with delight. As what? God's holy day. Honor the Sabbath in everything you do on that day. Don't follow simply your own desires or talk idly. It's God who's going to be your delight. I, the Lord, have spoken. Keep the Sabbath. Enjoy the Sabbath. Honor the Sabbath. See, it was difficult for the people in Isaiah's day to observe the Sabbath. It's difficult for us today to cease from our work that we're doing, sometimes just for ourselves. It's hard sometimes to cease following our own desires. Sometimes resting doesn't have a lot of appeal. We say we'd like some, but then we continue to drive ourselves. It's my observation, looking in the mirror and looking around, that we tend to consider work as being very important and rest somewhat trivial. If we have time, we'll rest. Sabbath is to be considered a time of delight. We rejoice in the blessings of God. When it's all about God, the Sabbath becomes a means of developing our relationship with God. Sabbath becomes a time where we're not trying to get something from Him, but rather it's an expression of our love for Him. We're going to spend a whole Sunday on the aspect of our worship of God on the Sabbath, but here's a spoiler. Even our times of worship are not about you. Our times of worship are not about what you want. It's all about what we do for God. Worship is about giving and not about getting. C.S. Lewis put it this way. He said, the perfect church service would be one that we're almost unaware of because our focus has been totally on God. It's quite a challenge for those of us who lead in worship. Let me wrap it up. Author J. John says this: taking a day of rest makes a statement about who we are. Taking a day of rest makes a statement about who is in charge of our life, who runs our life. It deliberately dethrones work from being central to our existence. Keeping the Sabbath reminds us of our limitations. It reminds us that we are dispensable to work. We are dispensable to the world. But we are not dispensable to our families, to our community, and to our God. Through keeping the Sabbath, we proclaim that God runs our lives. He is Lord of our life. He is Lord of our culture. Because it's all about God.